similar in terms of form and function and type. Our goal is that everybody gets a voice. I'm going to leave this with you guys here in that respect. If you guys haven't seen this already, it's a simple QR code. All you do is scan it with your phone, 4 questions and you're done. Surgeon, case type, clinical acceptability, spot for notes. Really, really simple. Goal here is everybody gets a voice, including the PAs, including the scrub, the circulator, the techs. We want anybody and everybody who's been involved in a hemostasis product using a case to render an opinion on it. We don't see this. We don't even know whether you did it or not. This goes straight up to Hartford, and that's how they vet the decision. Real caveat here is in your flowables, your flow seal and your Tisseal, by switching over to Ethicon, saves the system $1 million. That's it in a nutshell. Reduces your cost on everything else. Your Surgicel products, not only that, but the line item cost on flowables, tips, all that kind of fun stuff. Laminated, I'll leave this here with you guys, so as you kind of come and go, if you don't mind rendering evals. They do want them for every case, so don't be afraid if you guys have a bunch of different cases, render opinion on every single one of them. And thank you for that. Also, we're here. Most of you guys have my cell phone number. I'll leave, and Brittany's will leave business cards here for you after the case. Challenges, questions, any time of day or night, weekends, pick up the phone and call us. We're happy to help. Okay. So, the purpose for our visit here today is Suture, or as I like to refer to it, Suture 101 class. Some of this stuff's going to be pretty light. I'm going to rush through it at the beginning because you guys know Suture far better than most of my attendees. Or as I also like to refer to it, everything you ever wanted to know about Suture but were afraid to ask. So I highly recommend stop us, slow us down, specific questions. These always go better when they're interactive. Any questions on anything right off the bat? Any challenges you guys have had that you can think about with anything Suture related, Ethicon or other? All right, well, that's always a good way to start. What's a suture? The basic sense, a suture is a string. It's something that ligates tissue, provides tension for tissue while the wound heals, right? Based on that, there are a lot of different kinds of suture. You walk up to that suture rack at Baptist Hospital and you look at the 400 and something codes there of all different suture types and needle types, etc. It's really based on the concept of critical wound healing period. Everybody know what critical wound healing period is? What is it? You're shaking your head, Rebecca. Tell me what critical wound healing period is. It's the period of time that a wound takes to maintain its own strength and stability, right?
And it's different in everybody.
And it's different in everybody. Absolutely.
Months.
Big star for Dr. J. Rahman over here. Yes, it's different depending on tissue layers, and that is one of the reasons why there are so many different suture types. As it relates to surgical discipline, we focus really on 3. Anyone want to take a stab at what they are?
As far as tissue types?
Yeah. What layers are you closing?
It's probably skin or epidermis.
Number 1?
Fascia.
Number 3?
I don't know, Scarpa's involved in that?
Scarpa, if such a thing does exist. What's number 2? What's between skin and fascia?
Adipose? No.
Adipose, subcutaneous, fat, the one that really was most likely to give you an SSI if you don't close that void, right? Do they all heal at the same rate?
No.
They do not. Any idea what the rate of each tissue layer is for the healing healing purposes of tissue?
Medical response, stroke alert, alpha 3, 390.
I mean,
21 days.
I mean, I think there's variation.
There is.
I mean, the skin and face and scalp have better blood supply, so I think that's
Makes a huge
probably
difference.
your shortest.
Yeah.
I mean, My guess for fascia, probably for fascia is, I was gonna say 6 to 8 weeks.
Nail on the head?
Skin, Manny said 2 weeks.
Sometimes
I know
21
skin
days.
can close in as soon as 3 days, but
I think like.
5 to 7 is the average, but we
Yeah.
call it 2 weeks just to make sure it's gonna maintain its own strength, minus any suture involved. So you're right, skin 2 weeks, fascia is about 6, sometimes longer depending upon patient comorbidities, blood thinners, medications, etc. And right in between the two of them, your subcutaneous layer is about 4, okay? So the mnemonic they taught us early on in training, which I love, is MVP246. Stands for monocrol, vicryl, and PDS. So they're your 3 common synthetic absorbable sutures that Ethicon produces, and they are designed to last for those specific time frames. So when you're thinking about skin, you usually close skin with a monocrol, right? 3.0, 4.0, depending upon tension. Generally, subcutaneous would be a go-to for vicryl, also because it ties knots pretty well, right, as opposed to a monofilament. And then PDS is 6 weeks. So let me ask this question, because this is one I always like to throw in with this. Total joint cases. When you're seeing somebody close joint capsule or the fascia above the joint capsule, what do they usually go with?
I mean, here often it's vital.
You're absolutely right, it's vicryl, right? But what do we talk about in terms of the ability for fascia to heal?
Longer than what a vital.
Longer than what a vicryl was ever designed to do. So you're asking an awful lot out of that vicryl. But why would you use a vicryl instead of a PDS?
Absorption.
Absorption, okay.
Holds the knot.
What's that?
Holds the knot.
Holds the knot, there's the big one. So, we've got 2 commonalities in terms of what you guys are gonna use to close, right? Number 1 is your interrupted technique, right? Terrible. The other one is continuous, right? Pros and cons between the 2 of them, right? So your interrupted suture technique is great for strength, because if I have a problem and I've got a break in my suture, well, just you get the idea. My level above and my level below are going to maintain tension for me, right? Whereas on a continuous suture technique, if I get a break anywhere, I've got no tension anymore being held in there, and I've got the potential for a full dehiscence, right? So, great option for a monofilament suture. All I got to do is tie a knot at one end, I got to tie a knot at the other end. So I'm going to have a very large knot tower, because you're going to need to do 5, 6, 7 throws to get, especially a larger gauge suture type to tie down. Whereas over here with my interrupted suture technique, can you only imagine the knot towers that would exist if I wanted to go with a monofilament here, right? What are the challenges with large knot towers?
Stitch abscess.
Potential for abscess, sure. Anything like that that creates interstices or nooks and crannies in the common tongue is a good opportunity for bacterial colonization. So the bigger the knot tower you create, the greater the potential for those little nooks and crannies to house and benefit bacteria. So that's why typically, to round back to my initial question, we're talking about an ortho closure, we're talking about joint capsule fascia, we're talking about an area that's going to have a lot of range of motion and a lot of tension put on that surgical site that we closed immediately on, right? I mean, these patients are going to PT the following day, they're getting range of motion most of the time before the local even wears off, right? That gives them their opportunity to really get some range back early on. We've got a good suture selection here, right? Usually a size 1 or a size 2. It's only going to last or maintain its tension for 4 weeks, right? So that's ideal if we're talking about a young patient type, we're talking about somebody who's athletic, we're talking about somebody who's got good vascular blood flow, but go ahead and add on those comorbidities, medications that they're on, blood thinners, age, obesity. That's actually asking an awful lot for a suture that is not designed to maintain its strength through that period. So what's the alternative? Switch over to PDS and do a running closure on a high tension area?
I mean, other institutions, not so much us, I've seen them use barb sutures, whether it's a V-lock or a quill.
Okay, it's a good point. I hate both of those names, by the way. What we want to call them is Stratafix, which you guys have here on the shelf. We make two different kinds of Stratafix. One of them is a loop Stratafix. There you go. Right? It's a variable loop, so you can open that loop up, you can close it. All Stratafix and Ethicon is made out of PDS, so you automatically got your 6 weeks there. The beauty of Stratafix is, regardless of type that you're going to use, you're going to sew it running. The beauty of a barb suture is those barbs on that suture bite into the peripheral tissue, so if I do have a break, I knew that wasn't going to work before I even tried it. If I do have a break,
We'll just pretend.
go for it.
I don't know why it doesn't want to mounts on it.
There we go. So if I do have a break, it's going to function like an interrupted suture. Those barbs are going to bite in above and below, and we've done a variety of different style tests on dehiscence and tension, and Stratafix actually holds stronger than an interrupted vicryl suture does. Yeah, and it's a lot. It has a lot to do, and it's the same thing with, like, how many of you guys have seen this one? Right? Another concept here, Dermabond Prineo, right? You guys just switched over to Dermabond. How many of you guys have seen the Prineo? Seen it? Show of hands. Okay. So the caveat behind Prineo is that it's stronger than staples. So now, how would you say to yourself that this little thin piece of polyester mesh is stronger than a wound that's got staples across it? Impossible, right? When I have the same thing over here and I've got this mesh. So it's all about distribution of tension, just like the analogy that I'm using over here for the barbed suture. So it's not that a polyester piece of mesh is stronger than a steel staple. The problem is when tension or bad tension, slip and fall type of tension is applied to this, this maintains even tension across the entire surface, whereas the tension on something like this is going to be right on those two staple points. It's the skin that's going to tear, right? Not the polyester mesh. And that's why this application is going to be stronger than that application. It's also the same reason why when we're doing a running suture with a barb suture, it's going to last for the 6 weeks that we need it to. Those peripheral barbs that are laden throughout this suture type are going to be stronger than just those individual points that we're going to get out of an interrupted suture. And I can give you dictionaries worth of peer-reviewed studies that'll back up what we're kind of talking about with this. I would venture to say that moving forward, you're going to see a lot more barbed suture being used for more common cases than you do now, especially as price comes down. With you guys moving over under the TSA contract, it reduced your cost on suture too. So there's a lot less cost associated with a barbed suture and a lot less cost associated with a product like Prineo. Other honorable mention, because I'm going to kind of move on with this twofold. Real beauty of this is cosmesis. When this is applied to an incision, it really, really gives you an opportunity to get a very strong cosmetic effect. It is as strong as a 3/0 suture. It is stronger than skin staples. And when you go ahead and you apply that over an incision, it's sticky, so it allows you to lift the edges. So you can lift it up and you can kind of apply tension here and there and move it across until you get a perfect fine line from top to bottom. And as soon as you have that, glue it in place. It's going to maintain that perfect fine line. And if you want to get very, very detail oriented, where you would typically see with sutures, a little bit of a gap here, gap there, completely able to eliminate that with a product like Prineo. For the patient, they can be in the shower in 1 hour of this application. Benefit to the surgeon, this goes on in sterile field. It stays on for a minimum of 2 weeks. Around the 3-week point, it starts to fracture. Dog can lick it, run it through mud and dirt, nothing gets in or out of this. So that's the beauty of it. You put it on in sterile field, the patient goes home, and no matter what they do, how dirty this gets, nothing penetrates it. That's the beauty. I've had many surgeons, especially orthopedics, with busy patients who come back and their Prineo is absolutely black and disgusting. And their point to me is, this is gross, why would we want this? And my first question is, did you have a surgical site infection? Did you have a readmission? No, I did not. Well, then it did its job, right? Because that dirt and grime did not get into the incision. Questions on that one?
What happens when it comes
Beauty of
off?
it is this stuff got real inexpensive for you guys. We're literally,
So it will start coming off in the 2 to 3 mark range, and if you want to keep it on longer, you can actually cut around the edges so that it's still adhered to the skin and it will stay on. If you want to fully take it off, you can just rub Vaseline or any sort of petroleum on it, and it will be able to peel off after about 15 minutes.
What do patients like to do? They just let it slowly drip, or they just like scud them off?
yep.
Yes, they just let it come off. Just don't let your patients soak in water or anything like that, because that will.
Yep. Shower's fine, but yeah, you don't want to jump in a hot tub for an hour with it on. Yeah.
You'll soak it right
Makes
off.
sense.
Is it irritating when it stays on that long? Because I know glue sometimes can be irritating as
Yep.
it lets go, and that's what we were talking about just now.
Yep.
And the other thing is, did you guys do any, information, because I know that a lot of times the cosmesis, focus and goal is to like when the skin and tissue comes together and grows, that it grows like this and not like this. So it
Yep.
makes the pressure and distribution like you said.
Yep.
Allows it to do this when it do this. So
Yeah.
you're, you know,
Yep. Great points.
because I thought you were gonna get to that and you didn't, so
So-
do you have, I mean, that's part of it too, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So usually what I go through is the different phases of wound healing. So what you're referencing is the inflammatory phase of wound
Right.
healing, blood, nutrients, collagen fibers, all going into the area, so you're inflaming, and what you've got are wound edges that you're ultimately sewing, which are looking like this, right? So let's kind of do a little drawing here of the different tissue layers as we're kind of talking about it, right? Here's our fascia. So great point. Inflammatory phase, which lasts 3 days to a week, typically speaking. You're still going to close your fascia, right? You're still going to close your void here. With the perineum, now you have an option. You can do that subcuticular stitch, or you can eliminate it. Higher tension areas, I recommend using it. Lower tension areas, you don't necessarily have to, right? So either way, your choice of using that stitch or not using that stitch, right? So to your point,
Are you talking, which stitch are you talking about?
subcuticular, yeah, not sub.
So, yeah, but the hernia sounds like it's just working on the epidermis, not the dermis. So
It is.
How does that bring the dermis together? Because
All
it's a
right.
dead layer of skin.
Good question. Let me do a
The
quick
dermis
demo.
is what we do, not the epidermis. So you just, okay, I think I have an impression, okay, because people together focus on, then you get it, and then it's automatically
Correct.
Okay.
So let's just say, no worries. Let's just say, for instance, this is what we're closing, right? So let's just say I've already closed fascia and I've already closed subcutaneous, and now here's what I'm left with. I'm left with an incision that's got a little bit of gap like that. Typically what you would see, and to Rebecca's points, you're gonna have kind of raised edges at this point, which is what you want. Because after the inflammatory phase decreases, we want it to kind of drop down and be even. So in terms of usage of this, to close that, and you can put this on and take it off a half a dozen times. So, of course I just tore this. You can use it by pulling one end and closing. Say I like it, I want to get a little bit more tension here or approximation. Pulling it there, closing it. Until I ultimately get that perfect fine line. And you can be as anal retentive as you want. Lift it, pull it, tension, until you get a perfect fine line from apex to apex. Once you got it, glue it, and it's gonna stay right there. It's impossible to get better cosmesis because there's no other way to kind of approximate, and even like very popular with plastics for this one, abdominoplasties, bilateral mastopexy, things where cosmesis is very, very important. Really helps with that application. So if cosmetic effect is key, it's a good one. If a patient's concern for hygiene, it's a good one. A lot of good applications for this, and I've already kind of spent more time on this than I really wanted to, but Any questions on it? So it's here, it's on the shelf, and it's available for you guys to use if you'd like.
My only, what, you're still gonna talk about sutures more?
Yeah, I got on a tangent here and so
Okay.
rounded back to that.
My only question is gonna be like, monocryl is good for skin integrity for 2 weeks.
Yep.
But like the idea of absorbable sutures, like how long does it take until monocryl completely disappears?
Monocryl, I believe, is 91 to 119 days,
Yeah.
if I'm not mistaken.
Do they have one of these?
Yeah, you can have a few of them if you want.
Like you put a monocryl suture inside some of these.
I think I have enough of these.
PDF versions of that stuff.
I should be able to find one for you, I can send it over.
You still have a wound closure manual?
Hmm?
You guys used to have a really good paper wound closure manual.
The actual catalog?
It was more of a catalog per se. It had like techniques of wound closure. It was good for students.
I'll have to look, because right now just the catalog. It used to have like a previous section that had like knot tying things in the beginning of it, and then it was the actual catalog at the end. And I want to say that it's just the catalog now, but I can look into that because I have seen it. So maybe it might be just digital now.
I'll send you a picture of mine.
Okay.
Oh yeah, I've seen that. I was looking for a PDF version of it.
We also have a really good slideshow about wound closure I can send over to you, so that when you guys get new PAs, you can kind of do your own Suture 101,
Yep.
and then you'll be able to work through it. So.
There you go, any questions? All right, let me round back here. We talked through a lot of this kind of stuff. Localized wound factors, shape tension. I don't want to bore you guys with a lot of this intro stuff. Suture sizing.
Yeah.
More of a trivia question than anything else. So, with my eraser.
So, the only thing I would say is maybe dial back.
Oh, actually, we did that. We got that pen, yeah. Anybody here know what the largest suture manufactured is?
2-0. No, 2.
Two?
2.
Okay. Anybody else want to take a stab?
I thought it went up to like the double digits, like 10, 14, didn't it?
Okay, close.
Oh, really?
No? No one? Largest suture size made is a 7. Smallest suture size made?
10,
10-0, damn close.
Close.
Lucky number?
13.
11?
11-0.
11, no, I thought it was 10. It's like for cataract.
Exactly, mostly eye cases.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Pleasure was ours. Thank you for joining. Size of a human hair,
This is a good one.
5-0 to 7-0, depending. To kind of give you an idea.
Not my hair.
Be with you on that one. Any idea why they call them 2-0, 3-0, 4-0?
I know this one. They started with the top ones.
Okay.
Because that's the smallest they could manufacture. And then as they got smaller manufacturing
Yep.
sizes, they had to drop down and add the O's, right?
Exactly. So that's where the O's came from. So on old historical suture packs, like 50 to 100 years ago, a 2-0 would be reading on the pack like that. Or a 3-0 would be 3 zeros, give you an idea. So that's where the concept comes from, 2-0, 3-0. So what's stronger, a 2 or a 4-0?
A 2.
A 2 stronger, all right, so basics. I always like to ask a little trick question here or there. Okay. Here's another one, more importantly. When you drop down a suture size, how much strength do you lose it? So if you're going to the suture cabinet and the doctor's saying, I need a size 2 suture, right? And you're saying, well, we don't have that with the needle type, will you use a 1? And he's like, no. Why does he feel that way? Because 1, it's obviously not as strong, but how much strength did I lose from going from a size 2 to a 1, or a 0 to a 2-0?
Close.
Close.
Close to that.
40%, yeah. By going down 1 suture size, you lost 40% of the strength. So if you were to go from, say, a 1 down to a 2-0, a 2-0 is 80%, has 80% less strength than a size 1. It doesn't seem like that would be the case by a small drop like that in common sizes, but that's how dramatic the drop is.
Oh, wow.
And in terms of how we measure suture strength, we refer to it as tensile.
Inside.
Yeah, so you're basically connecting a suture at 2 different points and pulling it in perfect opposite directions, and it's how much it takes for that suture to snap. And suture size varies, so we talk about MVP 246 in terms of how long it's going to maintain that strength. But the little charts I passed out to you, in that column it speaks to BSR profile. It tells you over time how much strength the suture is losing from a week to week. Well, thank you for joining us. I know you.
I'll watch the.
Cheers. We're going to round back with you guys for dinner at some point too, so. Any unanswered questions? Questions on that part? New information, old information? Okay. Capillary action. We were talking about monofilaments. And we were talking about barbed sutures, right? So braided suture,
Braided.
suture, right? So a braided suture is made up of a variety of smaller filaments that are all woven together. Pull a little picture of it here.
3 of them, right? 3 woven.
Yeah. Scanning electron microscope at about 1 million, there's a cross section of a barbed suture. So not exactly what you would kind of think. Yeah, I'm sorry, braided suture. God, I'm dying here today. This is what
So
happens.
there's a central core with then multiple other
Strands.
Woven around.
I thought it was 3, kind of like a braid. You know,
Like a standard braid,
Yeah.
exactly. A little different than you might have kind of guessed.
It's a bunch of very, very small fibers just woven together.
I see that.
Yep. And that's cross section. So to your point, it is braided and they are moving back and forth to kind of gain that strength. But that's what you're looking at. And here's your little nooks and crannies. There's those little interstices, which is where your challenging bacteria is going to colonize. Versus.
Monofilament, that is just one strand.
Exactly. Just like you would think, fishing line. But anybody that's ever gone fishing to try to tie a knot or a lure on a fishing line knows how many overhand throws you need to tie to get
Tie
that.
a fisherman's knot. You're good to go.
Well, there you go, right? The fisherman's knot is the reason why fishermen have so many unique knots that they use is because of the challenges with a monofilament. Which makes sense. Let's see. Let's talk about antimicrobial here really quick. Honorable
So the
mention.
plus ones are antimicrobial?
Yeah, how many of you guys are familiar with plus suture or antimicrobial suture?
Yeah,
Never
the
heard of it.
purple Vicryl.
Well, Vicryl can come dyed or undyed.
Monocryl can come in antimicrobial too.
It can. Monocryl, Vicryl, and PDS can all come in antimicrobial.
And Stratifix.
And Stratifix. So let me Stratifix only comes antimicrobial, by the way. So why is that important? Why is antimicrobial going to help us out?
Decrease your wound infections.
What's it?
Decrease your wound infection.
Well, that's ultimately the goal. You're absolutely right. So, not that these are two of my favorite 3-letter organizations, but the CDC and the WHO have both put out a lot of studies, and there have been 20 years of peer review. So, antimicrobial suture is not new. Ethicon's been putting out versions of it for 20 years. We use a product, it's a triclosan-based product, ErgoCare PA. Controversy on triclosan, well, if you all brushed your teeth this morning, then you got 1,000 times more triclosan this morning than any barbed suture is going to have. But why is that important? So the bacteria doesn't grow on the suture line? Well, who cares? You guys are all using sterile technique. You all know the game. You've been at it for a long time. Your technique is solid. You don't have a lot of readmissions. And, unless you've got different categories of dirty wounds kind of coming in that you're dealing with, why would I even need to use this in an everyday case, right? Why would you? Okay?
I mean, part of my feeling is that, you know, you're not just operating on a clean environment, like you have clean contaminated and contaminated cases.
Absolutely.
So there's already bacteria that's gonna be present in the environment that's not normally there.
Just like an extra layer of protection maybe?
Yep, absolutely. On the top 10 list for the CDC and WHO, in addition to glove changes, gown changes, prophylactic antibiotics, it's number 6 on the list. Here's not what you're not considering. Jason, you made a really good point. But it's not the only point. Reason being, there's a lot of bacteria exists in the dermis of your skin, which is not surface bacteria, did not come in with the patient as a result of a clean, contaminated, or dirty wound to begin with. But your hair follicles, your sebaceous glands, within the dermal layer of your skin is innate bacteria that exists that your body is processing. All of the sterile technique, all of the prophylactic antibiotics in the world cannot eliminate the existing bacteria in your body. And it's normally not a problem because it exists in the dermal layer of your skin. The second you make that surgical site incision, you just released it. And that's a true story. When it comes to antimicrobial suture, this is an example of an agar plate, fortunately for everyone, not a real one, that shows a culture of bacteria with a standard suture and an antimicrobial suture. The moral of this story is an antimicrobial suture not only doesn't let bacteria grow on the string itself, creates a zone of inhibition. So like we were kind of showing before when we're talking different tissue layers here, right? So dermis, sub-Q, fascia. When I go ahead and suture that area with my 3-layer closure, I created a zone of inhibition around that area. The real beauty of this is like when we're talking about wound conditions of clean, contaminated, or dirty, right? The most common area for a surgical site infection is going to be in that incision. In those cases, we're going to be using prophylactic antibiotics. We're going to take all those surgical steps to ensure that we get the best result out of this. The problem is regardless of what happens, we can still, in that incision line, accumulate bacteria that just came out of the dermal layer if it did not come in with the patient. The beauty of antimicrobial suture is that it creates that zone of inhibition. Secondary to that, this area where you incised is the only area your prophylactic antibiotics can't get to, right? So all those blood vessels that were passing through here that are feeding this healthy tissue on both sides, once you incise that and you sever those blood vessels, large or small, we can't get blood flow to the area, so those prophylactic antibiotics can't also get to the area. And that's where something like a plus suture comes into play. And to Brittany's point, all our barbed suture, like we were talking about before, the Stratifix, is all antimicrobial. You can't get it any other way.
All suture.
All Stratifix.
Oh, okay.
All of Ethicon's barbed suture only comes antimicrobial. In terms of Monocle, Vicryl, PDS, there's still options. They're not going to last that long, by the way. We're already phasing it out.
Europe just switched over to Only Plus this year, so.
Yep.
What's the mechanism of action?
Sorry?
What's the mechanism of action?
Hydrolysis.
Okay.
Yeah. So you bring up kind of a good point. What does suture break down to? So manufactured suture or synthetic absorbable, as we refer to it, we design the compounds, and that's why we can determine how quickly or how slowly the breakdown is going to be and how long it can kind of maintain its tension.
But what's the antimicrobial mechanism?
Oh, God, that's a really good question.
The triclosan,
Yeah.
reduces the pH of the area of the tissue so that the bacteria cannot grow.
That's
So
right.
wouldn't that affect your white blood cells and your epidermis and your dermis too?
Not to a notable degree. And the same, you can ask the same question about Surgicel, right? So Surgicel has the same mechanism of action. You apply Surgicel, there's a reason why Surgicel is all antimicrobial, and it creates a pH shift. We looked at a lot of different things, and it's a good point that you brought up. We looked at things like, what's the compound they use in like Duraplep prep, chloroprep,
Chlorhexidine.
chlorhexidine. We looked at that as a possible, but the point is reactivity with the skin, like you're talking about. We looked at just using it like an antibiotic component in the suture. But the challenge is most people are over introduced to antibiotics anyways, to the point when you really actually need them, they don't become effective because so many things have antibiotics in them or they're so commonly prescribed. That's where we ended up in the triclosan in terms of how we were going to approach making that antimicrobial with ultimately the best end result with as much as we can limit its reactivity with a patient. Because everybody's in, it's like the conversation we're having with this, that Rebecca asked, is like, what about skin reaction? Well, the truth is 99.9% of people aren't going to have a skin reaction. But how many of you guys have seen even just putting steri strips on a patient and they come back with a rash around it? Everybody's at some point going to be a little bit allergic to something. But out of all the testing that we did with the different products that we talked to, and a bunch more that I'm sure I can't even remember, this was the least reactive and the most effective looking approach.
And the triclosan is fully absorbed in the body in 7 to 14 days. So you don't have to worry about it just hanging out in there for like months on end as well.
Yep.
Thank you.
No, my pleasure, and I hope I answered your question. Sometimes I go off on tangents and you need to be reined back in once in a while. And I like the questions. It's rare that I get asked a question that I can't answer, or one that makes me kind of think about the answer to a better degree. Suture's kind of like my thing. I always kind of like to pride myself on there's no question I can't answer on the topic, but every now and again I get stumped, so thank you for that. Let's see. Honorable mention, since we kind of got into talking about what's the process by which it breaks down lightly. So hydrolysis for absorbable suture breaks down to sugar and water, very easily absorbable by the body. However, natural sutures, honorable mention, natural sutures would include surgical steel, more for sternotomy closures, but even ones you're not thinking about like silk. Silk's the original suture. Silk has been around approximating tissue edges for 5,000 years. Ethicon loves to claim we invented suture, but there were some guys out there who are way ahead of us. Any idea why? Why was silk historically popular? What's that?
Readily available?
Okay, in some parts of the world, sure.
Consistency?
What's it?
Consistency?
Consistency, another good point. Naturally,
Easy to manufacture.
what's that?
Easy to manufacture.
Okay, another good point, which is why it's very cost effective too. Also non-absorbable. You put silk in your body, it's gonna be there with you for good. It does not absorb. Naturally antimicrobial. Bacteria does not grow well on silk, which is why it's very popular in bowel cases. The other one that I didn't mention is gut. You guys still use a bit of it?
Every now and then.
Yeah. Usually older surgeons. Why do they like it?
Absorbs quick.
Absorbs quick, especially the fast gut, sure. Now that we've kind of created our own compounds, we can mirror any version of gut. Concept behind it, and this was true many years ago, is way cheaper. Gut was very, very cost effective because it was harvested. We didn't have to manufacture it in the lab and do all the testing and research. Any idea why that's not the case now? Okay, well that's a good point. Never got that one before, but I like it. Not all that common in the United States, but about 10, 15 years back, there was something that decimated the cattle population in Europe. It's called
Mad cow disease?
That was it, mad cow disease.
The Jacob's disease.
Yep. So the challenge with that is that's where we harvest gut suture from, right? And that mad cow disease put a lot of stipulations on creating gut suture. There was only one continent in the world that did not have a case of it, which was Australia. Ironically, that's where Ethicon grows all of its suture, is in Australia. Then gets shipped over to Brazil, where it gets manufactured actually into suture, and then distributed out to the world. Does that sound cost effective anymore? Not really. And also, they have to monitor the animal from the start of its life till the end of its life, every minute of every day, and everything it ate. So it went from everything. So the moral of my story is it went from something that was very, very cost effective to something that wasn't very cost effective. And to bring that around to my original point, breakdown of synthetic absorbable hydrolysis, sugar and water, gut suture, organic acids. So it's gonna break down into gluconic acid, which is typically unreactive, but opinions vary on that because any organic acid within the body can have a reactivity potential. Another reason that we're moving away from gut sutures, and there's less and less options in that available these days. Questions on that one? More of a trivia than anything else. Why don't I wrap this up with,
Is it really made from the gut? Why
it is
called-
really made from the gut, yeah.
I did not know that. Figured it was.
They used to have something even preceding it years ago called cat gut,
Yeah, I've heard of
which was
that.
exactly what you think it
But I
is.
mean, it's no different than the idea of like the Native Americans using cinnamon.
Absolutely
It's a
right.
thread made from the gut of an animal like a deer.
Yep, exactly. Strong stuff. All right.
I'm sure you Peruvians use stuff like that.
They used fiber, like vegetable fibers.
Needle curvatures. We all know them, we all love them. Not the best. But these are your three commons. 5/8. Why different curvatures?
The type of suture over here,
Type of what?
because of the type of suture or the type of tissue you're closing or the
Okay.
wound you're closing.
Okay. So when you're closing skin, which one of these would you use?
3/8.
Okay. Why?
This is too superficial.
Yep.
You don't have to go deep.
Exactly. So for closing deeper cavity like
On the
sub.
port side, you use the 5/8 here, UR6.
Yeah, exactly. You know what UR stands for?
I don't know.
Urology. All those abbreviations mean something. So SH is simple half circle, CT is circle taper,
PS,
PS,
plastic surgery.
plastic surgery. So
Oh,
they're all,
really?
yeah, they're all abbreviated. Here, there's a trivia book. So the moral
Blue
is,
baby as BB? Blue baby, the baby, the masculine one.
so the moral of the story, Aldo hit it on the head, it's all depth, right? So if we're suturing something very superficial like skin, and we've got that much curvature, it's gonna create a lot of problems. I mean, as opposed to if we're suturing into a deep, narrow cavity, and we're trying to suture with a 3/8 curvature, you practically need to do a backflip to take your bite on one side through the other side and approximate. So curvature is all about turn of the wrist. The more curvature on a needle, the less you need to kind of turn your wrist to kind of get those peripheral bites and approximate. That's ultimately the goal for that. Questions on that one? Pretty simple, sort of self-explanatory. Name some needle points for me.
Blunt, cutting,
Blunt tip,
reverse cutting.
reverse cutting, taper point.
Yeah.
Taper cut.
What's the purpose of all those? Why do
Look
we
at the
need?
tissue, right? The
Okay.
skin, you want cutting needles,
Okay.
it's tough tissue. But if you're suturing organs, gut, you don't want it to be a cutting, so it's like more of a blunt tip.
Yeah. So the three primary ones that I usually talk to are the three common ones that you guys are most using, and we already sort of named them. So let's say this is our incision, and let's say our most common one is going to be a taper point. Right? So what's a taper point? Well, if you were to look at the front of the needle, it looks just like the tip of your pencil,
Yeah.
or pen or something like that.
Comes
Literally
to a
just
point.
kind of tapers down to a point, ironically. And the beauty of a taper point, like you indicated, makes nice round circles on it, right? Good for approximating, because when you're applying tension, you're pulling tension towards one another. And it's nice because that tension is being applied on a nice rounded area, right? But let's say I was using a cutting needle. So a cutting needle has the blade on the inside of the needle. Or, if you're looking at a suture pack, the beauty of a suture pack is it tells you everything you need to know, yeah. See the little triangle down there at the bottom? That tells you exactly what your point looks like.
There's a better.
Pass it around, sure. That's a mock suture pack. I'll round back to that one. But with a cutting needle, when I go ahead and take my pass or my bites, because the blade's on the inside, it's giving me a hole like that. So when I apply my tension, it's pulling against the cut spot, right? Whereas a reverse cutting needle, or my blade's on the outside of the needle, so if you're looking at the suture pack, that triangle is now facing downward. See what I'm saying? So now when I'm I'm using my cutter, because I've got that dense tissue or skin, but when I'm applying my tension, it's against the round area. Which is why your most common cutting needle for closing skin is your PS2, which is a reverse cutter.
Do you have a cheat sheet for the needles?
I do, and I'll tell you what, I'll grab your email addresses. I do a little like post pack. It'll have a lot of different things in it, including but not limited to. No, my pleasure. I don't have it here, but it'll give you a little diagram that if you print it out, it'll have like Ethicon's top 50 common needle types, tell you all the information on them, that sort of thing. But that's the difference between we can get into spatulated needles and very specified for eyes, but let's be honest, these are the three common ones you're using and why. So when you're kind of selecting a needle, you're thinking about two things. How is my tension going to be applied? What type of hole did that needle puncture and make? And how's the tension going to be pulled against it? And again, what's my depth of wound? Which is going to be indicative of whether I'm using a 3/8, a half circle, or even deeper, a 5/8. Make sense?
Question on the cutting needle.
Yep.
Now reverse cutting, obviously the tension is on the circle part, but where would you want the cutting edge to also be the point where you're putting tension?
Well, in towards one another. It's a really great question, and that's why you don't see standard cutting needles used all that frequently. More commonly, it's going to be a reverse cutting needle. And more commonly, if you go over and look at your suture rack, most of your cutting needles are going to be that reverse cutter. So PS2 is a reverse cutter, yep. And if you're looking at that suture pack, if you're looking at, go ahead and show what we're talking about, a taper point needle, and the image is going to look like that.
Yeah.
So you're literally looking at the tip of the point, right? Your conventional cutting needle is going to look like this.
Yeah.
Your reverse cutting needle is going to look like that.
Yeah.
An honorable mention, because we're talking PS2, if you look at a PS2 needle, it's going to look like that. PS2 is called a prime reverse cutting. So that's where you take a reverse cutting needle and you make it extra, extra sharp. It has a much narrower profile and a much, much sharper point. And that's what you're seeing when you look at the suture pack and you see that. It'll look just like the reverse cutter, but it'll have concave
You can see it here.
sides on it. Yep.
This is the prime versus this is the regular one.
So that's the concept behind basic needles. How many of you guys do cases vascular, cardiac, using those really small prolines?
Yeah, 6.0, 7.0.
Yeah. There's other needle types worth mentioning, and you guys do have them here. They're called Everpoint Hemoseal. You guys familiar with this?
No.
You ever see a weird needle prefix with an HS in front of it or an EVP on the skin? You know, like a Vicryls,
Maybe I
you know,
pay attention.
J246 or a Monocryls Y345.
Yeah.
Every now and then with a proline, usually specific to certain vascular guys, even really common in cardiac where you're dealing with calcified arteries, very difficult to find where we're going to kind of create the anastomosis when we're trying to bypass a major cardiac artery. Patients are getting older, comorbidities are higher, it's harder than ever to kind of find good spots to kind of penetrate. And when you're dealing with calcified needles, and typically speaking, when they're doing a cardiac anastomosis, you've got between 24 and 28 throws before I get from point A to point B to do that end-to-end or end-to-side anastomosis. The challenge that you run into when you're doing that type of a suture or that type of a sewing is when we start off, the needle's nice and sharp. When I get around to here, and you guys have been in cardiac cases and see what that needle looks like after they've gotten halfway around. It's not curved anymore, the tip's not sharp anymore, it's in really, really bad shape. But you can't exactly stop right there and go ahead and grab another suture. You got one try and it's gotta go all the way around, so you're gonna make the best out of the needle. EverPoint HemoSeal is kind of a cool technology in that regard. So for starters, an EverPoint needle is a coated needle, okay? It's gonna be a taper point, and it's made out of a special compound. It's called tungsten rhenium, so it's not the standard ethyl alloy or surgical steel that all of the other common needles are. It's actually derived compound that they made out of tungsten used in the space shuttle, and it's designed to be very, very resistant. Very hard, very resistant. What you do want to remember is they're also non-magnetic. So if you ever are using one of those needles and you lose it, a magnet is not going to find it for you. So that's really worth mentioning. And they're also very, very small. But the beauty of that compound is it stays sharper for longer. In addition to that, they coat it 40 times. It's a dip coating, dip coat, dry, dip coat, so that as those coatings wear off, it maintains the point of the needle. So instead of the tip losing its sharpness, the outer coating gets worn off first. That makes sense? Yeah. So they're expensive, not all that common, but in the case types like we just described, very, very helpful, very, very important, especially when it comes to kind of cardiac or vascular anastomosis where there's going to be a lot of calcification. HemoSeal is another interesting one. So HemoSeal takes the needle suture ratio to kind of a different. Well, it worked over here. There we go. So something that also matters in vessel anastomoses that may not matter in typical cases is needle to suture ratio, right? So a BV needle, which stands for blood vessel, or BV 175, smaller version of a BV needle. If you were to look at it in cross section, where the needle connects, right? This connection right here is called the swage. There we go. Okay, where the suture strand is crimped into the needle. Now the suture strand, if you look close in it, goes into the needle and then it gets crimped solid right there. So there's your connection. Pop-offs less so they're designed, let's be honest, any needle's a pop-off if you pull hard enough on it. Thank you. Okay. The concept behind HemoSeal for vessel anastomosis is to adjust this, right? So generally speaking, very small needle, very small suture strand. The doctor might want a 5/0, 6/0, 7/0, 8/0, depending upon what they're suturing, how delicate it is, right? But a BV 175 is a BV 175. So regardless of how thin that suture strand is, that needle has its own thickness. And what we have in the situation here is the needle's making a hole that's this big, but the suture passing through it is that big, right? So what are we gonna get out of high pressure vessel anastomosis? We're gonna get leakage, right? So the concept behind HemoSeal is they adjust the thickness of this needle to match the suture strand that's going with it. So now we take a BV 175 needle, right? And we've got it on a 5/0 suture, right? And the ratio is 1:1. We put it on a 6/0 suture, and the needle got thinner. And so on and so forth down the line. So it maintains a 1-to-1 needle ratio. Same tip, same curvature, same cord length in terms of distance from tip to swage. So in all ways, that needle is still the same size and still familiar. But now you'll see readings on a suture pack which say BV 175. God, I can't even draw here. Bear with me. 175-5 or BV 175-6. That's indicative of the ratio decreasing the gauge of the needle to match the gauge of the suture. A little bit more than you asked for, but the figure. Try to give you guys some interesting stuff that maybe you weren't familiar with from prior experiences. Questions on that?
Wow, this is so
Okay.
cool.
All right. I think we're over time here. I appreciate you guys having us
Thank
in.
you so much.
Pleasure was definitely ours. If there's any favor you can do for us, right, and not asking for favors, but you're all in cases right now, and we're doing a hemostasis trial. They spoke to this when we first came in. Very, very important. Hartford wants everyone's opinion, especially yours. It's not just for the doctors, it's also for the scrubs, the circulators. If you were in a case and you saw an Ethicon biosurgery product used, Surgiflow, Visticel, Surgicel powder, loved it, hated it, we want to know about it. We're out of the loop. There's a little QR code, scan it with your phone. It's 4 questions, and it's basically who was the doctor, what was the case type, was it clinically acceptable or not, and a room for you guys to kind of put in some opinions or notes. Please, by all means, fill it out. A changeover to our side of the fence saves the hospital $1 million. It reduces suture cost, it reduces TSA cost, it reduces line item cost per suture, and I would love to say our stuff is so much better than the competition. Right, yeah. Right, there you go, good point.
It's there.
It's on top of the printer.
Yeah,
Although stuck it there, we'll put it up. You just scan it and it'll give you the question.
yeah, we'd appreciate it. We really want everybody to really have an opinion on this. If you saw something you liked, if you saw something you didn't like.
If you thought the setup was faster, even the simplest things they want to know, so.
She's product pitching now, cheers.
Well, it also takes like 5 minutes to set up Tissio versus 30 seconds for Mrs.
But thank you guys for having us, greatly appreciated. One of the things I'd like to do that we used to do a bit before COVID, is do like a dinner with you guys once a year, just to kind of give feedback, what's good, what's not good. So let's get through the holidays, 'cause it's kind of a tough time, but after the first of the year, we'll round back with you guys. And just for the record, we've usually done this at the casino, because there aren't that many great places to do it other than that, unfortunately. But they really frown on casinos on our side of the fence. So any restaurants you guys can think of outside of the casino would be great. So that's some time to give us some thought between now and then.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, our pleasure.
And then I'll get you that packet, and if there's anything extra that you're looking for, I can search for it.
No, you already texted me the list of dates.
We'll have some fellows starting in April. So if you have it, suture or skin pads,
Oh, 1000%,
Okay.
yeah, we can bring those in.
yeah, there's gonna be continuous